Hi everyone, I'm Rick Beato. For those of you that saw my video, Fortunes of Hard Work, there's another story that also was equally important in my musical development, and I call it how rediscovering rock brought me here today. I would say that there are literally 4 days in my life that I can pinpoint almost to the exact day that have been forks in the road that set me upon a path that led me to sitting right here, right now, talking to you. These were at the time just regular days, regular decisions, but they ended up being monumental events that shaped the rest of my life. And this is the story of one of them. The story begins when I'm in my second year of teaching at Ithaca College during the summer of 1989. Now, I taught at Ithaca from 1987 to 1992, and just for a point of reference, I had written my Beato book just before this story happened. I had just finished it. So it began on a Sunday night before my regular Sunday night solo guitar jazz gig. I had started playing at this club called Simeon's in Ithaca, New York. It was a restaurant that was on the Commons, and I had a Sunday night jazz gig there. I would play solo classical guitar, but play standards for 3 hours. Now, any of you that know about playing solo guitar, it's hard for 3 hours, and I would play standards. Well, I had a friend of mine, Alan, that would come by, and he would sit in with me. He would walk by the window when I was playing. He'd see me in there, and he'd say, "Hey, do you mind if I sat in?" I said, "No." So he'd come back. About 10 minutes later, he lived right around the corner from the club with his bass and his bass amp. Now, Alan wasn't a phenomenal jazz player. He had a great ear, and he could walk a bass line. And it was way easier to get through the gig with Alan sitting in and playing. So anyways, he came in and he played, and he would start doing it every week. So it would start being a regular thing where Alan and I would play together. So after a few months of doing this, one day Alan calls me up and he says, "I want you to come by my place before the gig. I want to play you a couple things." So I go by his place and he says to me, "I want to play you a couple songs I wrote." Now, Alan played in a cover band or his own band in town, and I knew he was a singer. I never really heard him sing, but he said, "I want to sing you a couple songs I wrote." I said, "Okay, great." So he sings me a couple songs he writes, and I said, "Wow, you have a great voice. These are great songs." He said, "Yeah." He says, I have an 8-track recorder, reel to reel." He says, "and I want you to record on this demo with me." And I said, "Well, I don't really play rock anymore. I played rock back in the back in the 70s when I first started. That's kind of how I started, but I don't really play rock anymore." He said, "Just come on down and just play on some of these things." I was like, okay. So I go and I play on these demos with him, and next thing you know, about a month later, Alan says, "Well, I finished the recordings. We're going to have a record release party at my place." Well, I'd been working on some of my own demos on a 4-track at the time. So he said, "Why don't you bring your tunes and we'll have like a record release party and we'll play the tape." So I brought mine over there, and I worked on a couple songs, and I had my friend Aiden play piano on it, and it was just on a 4-track. This is really simplistic demos. So we had this get together, and he had a bunch of friends there, and he played the recordings, and I heard his, and I said, "Wow." I mean, the parts I played I thought were terrible, but the songs were really good and they were really catchy. A couple weeks later, Alan calls me up at school and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just finishing my last class." "Why? What's up?" He said, "You need to meet me downtown right now." I said, "I can meet you down there in a little bit." So I head downtown and I meet up with Alan, and he says, "I got a call from the senior VP of Elektra Records named Howard Thompson." I said, "How did that happen?" He said, "Well, I sent him a tape, and I just got off the phone with him, and he said that he thought it was a tape from someone else because it just said Alan on it. He thought it was from another Alan, and he actually accidentally opened it and listened to it. And it was this recording we had made." And I said, "Well, what did he say?" He said, "Well, before I spend $500,000 on your band, I need to see your band play, and I want to give you some money to record some more songs." And he says that he wants to give us $5,000, or give Alan $5,000 to make a recording. So Alan said, "Well, we got to write some more songs." Alan had recorded his 8 best songs. So Alan said, "I tell you what, why don't we take this $5,000 and let's get an apartment together and we'll write the songs together and we'll spend $500 and we'll make the recording, we'll keep the rest and pay the rent for the rest of the year. I think it was $160 a month that we paid in rent. I mean, a ridiculous amount in Ithaca at the time. It's 1989. So I was like, oh, that sounds great. So we move into this place together, and he says, okay, well, let's start writing these songs. And I said, well, I don't know how to write. How do you write songs? I mean, I've written a couple songs when I was in my punk rock bands back in high school, but I didn't know how to write songs. Well, Alan said, and Alan knew every song you could think of. Rolling Stones songs, the Beatles songs, anything you could think of, Alan could play instantly. So he said, well, you have to have a hook. You got to have a chorus that's memorable. You have to have a signature part in the intro of the song. You have to have a bridge. You have to have, a lot of songs have pre-choruses. I'm like, okay. And now I was in a jazz coma, as people used to call it, in the 80s. I didn't listen to anything but jazz or classical music when I was a professor and when I was in grad school and undergrad. That's all I did. I never ever watched TV. I didn't listen to the radio. I didn't listen to any rock music at all. Nothing. I didn't know bands. I never heard of bands that had come out. I didn't know who U2 was. I didn't know Bon Jovi. I didn't know Def Leppard. Nothing that came out in the 80s. The Cure, whoever it was, I never heard of them. I literally hadn't heard of any of these bands. Well, not any of those bands. But a funny thing had happened about 6 months earlier when the dean of the College of Music at Ithaca, where I was teaching, came to me and said, Rick, we really want to expand the reach of the music school, and we want to offer some non-majors a chance to take lessons. Would you be interested in teaching a couple non-majors? And I said, sure, why not? Well, this really began my reawakening to rock music, although it was not any rock music that was on the radio at the time. So I had this one kid named Daryl, and he was an art major. And he came in, he couldn't play the guitar really very well. He came in, he had this crazy hair, and he always had paint all over him. So I said, well, what do you want to learn, Daryl? And he said, well, I want you to teach me this song. Now, I was teaching people really, I was teaching jazz guitar as a professor. So, and I was teaching improvisation, theory, arranging, all this stuff. So I have this kid that comes in, and he has some albums under his arm. And there were no, CDs were out, but we didn't have a CD player. So we had a turntable in our office. So he pulls out this record, and he said, this is a band, I want you to teach me a song off this. I said, what's the band called? He says, Nirvana. I said, okay. And I said, what is this record? I look at it, it's called Bleach. So he puts it on, and I'm listening to it, and I said, wow, this is really cool. Is this what kids are listening to? He said, no, most people really don't know Nirvana. This is a new band. This is their first record, but they're really cool. And I said, this reminds me of kind of the punk rock stuff that I did back in the late 70s. That was punk rock in the new wave. And he said, yeah, they're really cool. So I teach him the song called About a Girl. And anyways, I said, well, this is interesting. So over the year, he starts introducing me to all these kind of indie rock bands that came. Sebado, a lot of bands that were on Sub Pop, a lot of bands, SST Records, Matador, all these kind of indie rock labels that were really cool. And I was like, wow, this is really different than, is this what's going on? He said, no, this is what's called indie rock. And I said, wow, it's really cool. I like this. So anyway, Alan and I start playing in this band and get this $5,000 to make a demo. So we write some songs together. Alan teaches me how to write a song, and we write 8 songs together. Keep the money, pay our rent for a year, and start doing demos. So anyways, we made this 8-song demo. We go down to New York City to Rockefeller Center to where Howard's office is. So Howard then listens to each song like 3 or 4 times and makes critiques. I don't like the verse in this. This is a great pre-chorus. Oh, this is a good chorus, but the lyrics need work. Wow, this is a great bridge. And so we listen to it for about 2 hours, everything, and Howard takes us out to lunch, and then we drive back to Ithaca. It's 4 hours each way, and I go back to my teaching and everything. And so then Howard says, I want to book you a gig. So we don't have a band. So anyways, we get a couple friends of ours to play guitar and bass in the band, guys that we knew around town, and went down and played our first gig at CBGB's in 1989. So he comes down to see us play, and we play, and we weren't very good, but Howard thought that we had potential as songwriters. So anyways, for the next year, every month we did an 8 to 10 song demo every single month, and we went down to New York, and Howard would critique our songs. Now, he never signed our band or anything. We didn't really have a band. He never signed Alan and I, but he was really great about critiquing our songs. And I started to become more fascinated about the ability to write, because here I was so engrossed in this incredibly complex music, all these things that I talk about in our videos. And then the idea of the simplicity of writing a melody that was so stripped down to its basic elements, that writing something that people could relate to, millions of people, that I realized, instead of scoffing at it like I always had, I realized how difficult it is to write something that's actually memorable, that people want to listen to over and over. Anyways, Alan and I start playing together, and in 1991 we played a gig at CBGB's, and a guy comes backstage and is like, "You guys have hit songs, I want to sign you to a publishing deal." So, wow, what is that? Well, he goes, my name's John Tita, I'm with Polygram Publishing. Have your lawyer, you have a lawyer? And we had a manager at the time. He said, "Yeah, we have a lawyer. And have your lawyer call me, I want to send you a publishing deal." And we're saying, "Come on, this is a joke, he doesn't want to do it." So anyways, we call the lawyer on Monday, Alan does, and the guy does work for a publishing company. He does want to sign us to a deal. So we negotiate this publishing deal over the next few months, and we had this manager at the time who didn't know anything, and we didn't know anything. And we got, I don't know, like 85 grand, 100 grand, I can't even remember, but I think Alan and I got $5,000 when it was all done. Basically, the lawyer completely ripped us off. We didn't have any clue at all. And we got ripped off, and we were still broke. And we were in this indie record deal with a guy that wouldn't let us out of the deal, and we made a crappy sounding record that we weren't able to do anything with. But we went out and toured around the country, and the band ended up breaking up in 1993. I took a leave of absence from my teaching gig in 92, after the 92 year. So in 93, I spent traveling around with this band, and it was just a three-piece, like power pop band or whatever you'd call it. And we traveled around the country and played gigs in dive bars, but saw the entire country, and it was really fascinating. But at the end of it, I was broke. Our singer Alan wanted to quit, and I didn't have any money to eat with, so I had to move back in with my parents. So this is January of 1994. My car is going to get repossessed. I only owed $1,000 on it. It was only like an $8,000 car. I've been paying it for years, but I couldn't pay it anymore. I wouldn't say it's the first time I was really depressed, but it's probably only the second time I was ever depressed in my life. The first time being when I didn't get into college. Here I was, a 32-year-old man. I quit my steady college teaching job that was a great job, and I'm living back in my parents' house. My poor old parents were totally not judgmental at all. They didn't make any judgment on anything. My mom was glad to have me home. Here I was broke, my car is going to get repossessed, I tried to make it in a rock band, and my parents are nothing but cool about it. But it didn't matter, because I was a failure at this. I was never able to have any success with this. I couldn't write a song that was a hit song. No matter how great of a musician I was, no matter how many polychords I knew, no matter how much I knew about writing a melody, I couldn't write a simple melody that people could relate to and that would become a hit song and change my life in some way. Or I couldn't, the band I was in could never had what it took to really make it in the music business. The other thing was that I was never part of a scene like there was in Seattle, because I was fascinated with that. I was fascinated with scenes that were happening all over the country, really all over the world, in different cities. When the Seattle music scene developed, I couldn't read enough things about how that happened. And I spent time in Seattle in 1992. I spent a few days there and exploring the music scene, and was absolutely fascinated, asking people, how did this happen? Oh, well, they had clubs that let people get in for $5. You pay $5 on the weekend and you get a wristband. You can go to any club you want. They also had radio stations that promoted the rock bands like KJET, KCMU, KGRG. In addition to that, they had practice spaces that would have 500 rooms in it. I went to some of them. It was unbelievable. Every person you saw on the street in Seattle in 1992 was carrying a guitar, had long hair. It was unbelievable, the energy in the air at the time. So here I am home in 1994, totally broke. All my brothers and sisters say, oh, Rick is really depressed. We've never seen him like this. So I think it was my sister Pat calls me up and says, we want to have you over to my brother Lou's house and get together and talk. So they basically had this intervention for me. We've never seen you depressed like this. What can we do to help? The thing that I explained to them that night was that I wanted to go around the country and explore different music scenes. And I remember from traveling around touring with my band before that, I went to all these cities all over the United States, and I wish that I could stay in each city for a couple months and explore and get to know all the musicians and get to know all the bands that were there. I remember reading an article in the New York Times that December that I had kept, because there was no internet then. There's no cell phone, there's no internet. So I had this article that talked about all the happening scenes that there were in the United States and in Europe that had all the hip indie music scenes. They talked about Chapel Hill, they talked about Chicago, Wicker Park area, they talked about London, they talked about Austin, Texas, all these different places. I said, I'm going to save up some money, and in a few weeks, I'm going to leave here again and go keep exploring. So my brother Ray hires me to do a temp job for about 6 weeks at the company he works for, and I save up, I don't know, maybe a couple $1,000s, and I got my car paid off and out of debt. So it was literally going to get repossessed the next week. I only owed $1,000 on it, but it was going to get repossessed. And I remember I saved enough money through working for my brother. I saved a few $100s. That was it. After paying off these debts, paying off the car and things like that. So anyways, I get this money together, and all of a sudden Kurt Cobain died on April, I believe, 8th or so. And I said to my parents the day before that happened, just randomly this happened. I said, I'm going to leave tomorrow and head off on this journey. And they said, where are you going to go? I said, I don't know, but I'll call you when I get there. So I get in my car and I start driving. I have a map of the United States. I start driving and I said, I don't know where I'm going to go, but I'm going to head west. And I start driving. So about 13 hours later, I hit Chicago. I'm coming from Rochester. I hit Chicago. I called my parents from a payphone and said, I'm in Chicago. So I go to this place in Wicker Park. I stayed overnight somewhere. I think I slept in my car. And I get to Wicker Park. I pull into a parking spot. That's where Smashing Pumpkins was from. There's a band, Veruca Salt, at the time. There was a bunch of cool bands that were happening at the time. So I see this woman out walking by my car, and she notices I have an Ithaca College sticker on my car. And I get out of the car. She goes, are you from Ithaca? And I said, yeah, actually, I just moved. I used to teach at Ithaca College. She goes, I'm from Ithaca. Wow, this is unbelievable. What are you doing here? I said, well, I'm just honestly coming here to check out the music scene and see what it's like. She goes, well, I know, my husband knows a lot of bands here in Chicago, and why don't you come over? Where are you staying? I said, I don't know. I don't have a place to stay. Well, why don't you come over and you can hang out and meet my husband, and I know some people that you might be able to stay with. So I go with this woman. This is in the middle of the day. I go with her over to her place, meet her husband. We start talking. She goes, I have some friends that go to the Chicago Institute of Art. And I think that they have some space in one of their places. So they call them up, this guy up, and they say, a friend of mine, Rick, just came to town. He needs a place to crash. Can he crash with you? Oh, yeah, no problem. So I go over to this artist's place, and there's like 3 or 4 artists that live in this loft, and there's all these paintings and all this artwork all around. And the guy's like, yeah, no problem. You can stay. We got an extra mattress. You can just stay on the floor here. So I take all my stuff out of my car. I had one guitar and an amp and a couple bags of clothes. That was it. So I set up there, and over the next 2 weeks, I go to every club in town and I go see all these bands. I'm checking out the music scene. I'm meeting people. Every band, every night I'm going out to see multiple bands and checking it out and seeing what the scene's like there. So after about 2 weeks, I say to my roommates, you know what? My journey's not done yet. I need to continue on. I don't feel like this is where I'm supposed to be. So they said, okay, cool. So they help me pack up my car. I get back in my car and I start driving. Well, As I'm driving south through Chicago, I have no idea where I'm going to go. And I'm looking at a map of the United States. And I said, where am I going to go? And there's no internet. There's no cell phones. So finally, after driving south in Illinois for a few hours, I decide, okay, I'm going to stop at a payphone. I'm going to call 2 people. And whoever answers the phone is where I'm going to go to next. So I called my friend Paul in Nashville, whose phone was busy. And I called my friend Cammie in Denver. And Cammie owned this club that my old band had played in. Didn't own it, but booked a club my old band had played in. And she said, oh, come here. You can stay with my roommate Donna and I. You can stay in our living room. So I was like, okay, I'm going to Denver. So I start heading and I drive the 20 hours or whatever to Denver. I go to Denver. I see Cammie and Donna. They help me load the stuff in. They say, you can stay in the living room. So I sleep on their couch. First day there, they take me out and I meet their friends Tony and Dave who play in this band. The band was called Sweetwater Well. It was a big band around Denver at the time. It was like acoustic band and they didn't have a bass player. So they said, you want to play bass? I said, sure. So I start playing with bass with the band. So the first night there, they have a gig. The second day I'm there, they have a gig and there's like 400 people there. So over the course, I ended up staying in Denver for 3 months and I played with all these different bands. I knew everybody in town in Denver, every musician in town, and I loved it. But all this while, I kept calling my lawyer in New York saying, I got to get out of this deal from this old band I was in. He said, well, you're going to have to come to New York and you're going to have to ask your old manager if you can get out of the deal. We're going to have to figure something out. So I tell Cammie and Donna, my roommates, I said, listen, I'm going to have to go back to New York at least for a while and see if I can sort this out and I get out of this contract because I can't join another band until I do. So pack up my stuff, I get in my car and I drive 32 hours to New York City. Now I have no place to live there, I have no place to stay. I have a couple friends that live there, so I get there and I call my friend Rick Harth and I say, Rick, hey, he's like, what are you doing? And he's calling on payphones. I said, I'm in New York and I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but I need a place to crash. He says, oh, you can definitely crash with my friend Roger. He lives on First Ave. He goes, you remember Roger? I said, yeah, I remember Roger. He says, here's his address. I'm going to call him right now. You go over there and meet him. So I drive 2 blocks over. Rick was on Avenue D. It's probably 3 or 4 blocks. He was in the Alphabet City. So I drive over to Roger's place on the corner of 1st and St. Mark's. St. Mark's is 8th Street in New York City. And Roger comes right down. And I had met Roger before. He's a great guy. He's like, come on, you can stay here. No problem. Let me help you get your stuff. So I'm double parked out there. We cart my stuff up to Roger's place up on the 2nd floor, and I move in with him. So he said, how long do you need to stay? I said, I have no idea. I said, I want to check out the scene here while I'm here, but I'm trying to get out of this contract. He says, you can stay as long as you want. Just as an aside, the place that we lived on the corner of St. Mark's and First was about 100 yards, not even 100 yards from the club Chenet, which held about 20, 30 people, where Jeff Buckley used to play all the time, and I would see him there playing. So I could literally walk out from my apartment and be there in about 40 seconds. So the first day I'm there, I get a Village Voice, and he says, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to check out some bands. So I circle 5 bands to audition for. They're looking for people. I start auditioning for bands literally on the 2nd day I'm there. So the first audition was with a band called Ivy. Now, I went over to the singer, and the singer was married to the guitar player. His name's Andy Chase, and Dominique was his wife. And there's a bass player called Adam Schlesinger, who happened to be in Fountains of Wayne later. So I meet them, and we talk, and they're like, wow, this guy's great. And we played together, and he said, okay, you can be in the band. So I start in that band, but then I auditioned for 4 other bands, and I get in 4 other bands. One of the bands became Skeleton Key later on that got signed to Capitol Records. Another band was this band based in Amsterdam that was heading back there that was going to make a record, and a couple other bands I don't even remember at this time. So I was bartending on a boat to make money because I didn't have any money at the time. So, and I didn't know how to bartend either. So I'm bartending on this boat in New York City in 1994. Now by this time, this is the summer, because I'd already been to Denver. I'd been to Chicago and Denver, and now I'm in New York. So I'm there. I start playing gigs with bands. I'm playing all these different bands. I'm playing bass in one band. I'm playing guitar in another band. I'm playing bass and keyboards, or guitar and keyboards in another band. So one day, after about 2 months, I'm out at CBGB's playing with this guy, Chris, in this trio. And Howard Thompson's there, the guy that I'd known from Elektra Records that I hadn't seen in years. So Howard's there and he sees me. He's like, Rick, what are you doing with this? Why are you playing bass with this band? It was just a trio. He said, you're way too good to be playing with this guy. This guy's terrible. I said, well, I'm playing with a bunch of different bands. He goes, you need to do your own music. Why are you doing other people's music? Go do your own music. So I go back to Roger's house and I said, you know what? Howard's right. Okay, Roger, I'm taking off. I'm gonna move somewhere else. I'm not sure where, but I'm gonna go back home to Rochester and figure it out. So I drive back to Rochester that day. It's like 6 hours. And the next day, that band from Amsterdam calls me up and says, listen, we want you to come play bass on this recording with us. And it's in London. And I said, when? They said, tomorrow. Can you go? Do you have a passport? I said, yeah. And they said, we're going to buy you a ticket to go to London tomorrow to play bass. So I said, okay, fine. So I told my parents, they're like, are you serious? What? And so they somehow get me the tickets for the next day and I fly to London. Well, I purposely did not bring a bass with me, knowing that they would have one there and I didn't want to be saddled with that. So I just had a shoulder bag with clothes in it. That was it. Didn't bring anything. So I get there and we start rehearsing with the band and the singer's just messed up on drugs. I mean, it was horrible. So we rehearsed for 3 days and we're at the studio outside of London, about 30 miles out, called Jacob's Farm. And it was a studio that was inside a house. It had an SSL console, and there were a couple of studios that were in there. And so we rehearsed for 3 days, and the president of the label comes in. He was German, and he realizes the singer's a mess, and that we can't make this record. So he says, okay, we're canning the project right now. So I had a return ticket 5 weeks later because I was planning on being there. So every one of us had to go in and negotiate with this guy our contract. And I said, listen, you said you're going to pay us $3,000. I came over for $3,000. I'm going to get paid $3,000, period. So the guy has a stack of hundreds about this big and he peels off $3,000 and gives it to me. So I go to the people that own the studio and they said, well, listen, you can stay if you need to stay. However long you need to stay, you can stay here. So I said, okay. So I had $3,000, which was a ridiculous. I never had $3,000 in cash with me. So I decided, well, I'm going to go. I want to check out the music in a few places. So I want to go to Bristol. Now, the reason I went to Bristol because there was a band Portishead that was blowing up at the time that I really liked. And I wanted to see what was going on in that scene because I had heard there were a lot of really cool bands happening in Bristol. So I get on a bus and I head to Bristol. I get there. And I check into a hotel because I had cash. So I spent a few days in Bristol, checked out the music scene there, and then I was like, well, I want to go to Wales and see if there's anything going in Wales. So I went over to Wales, I went across the bridge to Chepstow, then went to Cardiff, and I spent a few days in Wales to see what was happening there, if there was anything there. Then I decided, you know what, let me go back to London and do some more investigation there. So I went back to London and I stayed for about 2 weeks and I checked out, I went to see bands every night. I was going to see all these people and seeing what was going on in the London music scene. Then I decided, you know what, I want to go to Amsterdam because I hear that there's stuff going on there. This is with no internet at all. So I get on a hovercraft to go across the English Channel. I get on a bus, I go to Amsterdam. And I spend about a week in Amsterdam. I'm like, no, this is not happening. So I ended up going back to England. I stayed the rest of the time in London, and I ended up leaving 5 weeks later. I come back to the United States. I get to my parents' house, and I still had probably a couple $1,000s. And I said to them that I was going to move somewhere else. And by this time, they were like, okay, whatever. This is, whatever you want to do is fine. So I decide next I'm going to go to Nashville. So I go to Nashville and I go to my friend Paul. He was my old college roommate. He said, you can stay with me and my wife, and he had just had his daughter, and you can stay with us as long as you want. So I check out Nashville and I quickly decide this is not for me. There's no rock scene there. It was strictly country music at the time. It's 1994. This is in September or October. And I decide, okay, I'm going to go to Austin, Texas, but I really want to check out Chapel Hill because there were bands like Superchunk and there were all these Matador Records bands that were there, all these indie rock bands that I really liked. So I get in my car, I drive to Chapel Hill, and I realize there's really no central place there, and it didn't seem like it was a place that I could really even meet people to figure out what was going on. So I said, okay, well, forget this. I'm just going to head to Austin. So I started driving south, and I said, okay, I'm going to go through Atlanta, and I'm going to call my old college roommate, Doug. He was my roommate junior year of college. So I called Doug up. This is at about 11 o'clock on a Tuesday, 1994. This is in November now. So I called Doug. I said, Doug, hey, it's Rick. He said, what are you doing? And I'm calling from a payphone. I said, I'm at this place called the Lenox Mall here in Atlanta. He said, what? He said, well, why don't you come meet me for lunch? I said, where are you? He said, you see that building, that black building across the street? I said, yeah, it's like 7 stories. Like, yeah. He said, that's my building. Come on over. So I literally takes me 5 minutes to drive over there. I drive over to Doug's building. I go there, I go upstairs, I meet him. He's like, man, it's been so long, I haven't seen you. Doug had gone to grad school here and gotten his law degree, and he was a lawyer. He went to Emory University. So as soon as I get in there, he goes, I got you a gig for tonight. I said, what? He said, I got you a gig. And I said, well, I'm not staying. I'm on my way to Austin. He says, you can use the money. I got you a gig. I got a place. You got a rehearsal at 2 o'clock. And I said, where? With who? And he said, this friend of mine, Francisco. I was like, okay, fine. So we eat lunch, and he says, here's the directions to get down to Francisco's house you're going to have a rehearsal. So I drive down, I meet Francisco, and Francisco, unbeknownst to me, Doug had called Francisco and says, convince Rick to stay here. He wants to go to Austin, but convince him to stay here. So I get to Fran's house, and Fran says, let me unload your stuff. I say, hey, no, I'm not staying. I can't stay. He goes, well, it's not going to be safe in the car. I have an empty bedroom. Let's go put it in there and everything. So we do this. We do a rehearsal. I meet some of his roommates. Nice guys, all musicians. So he says, we have this gig tonight. You're going to play bass on it. I said, okay. So I go, and it's all cover tunes. So we rehearse, and we go down and play the gig. Then I say, well, I'm going to leave tomorrow anyways. He said, no, don't leave tomorrow. We have a gig tomorrow night too. As a matter of fact, we have gigs every day for the next 10 days. I said, what? No, I can't stay. He says, no, you should definitely stay. You can use the money, right? I said, well, yeah. Now, during this time in New York, I was recording my own rock music on a 4-track that my friend Roger had. And I had all these kind of weird songs that I had written. And they were not commercial songs at all. They were just really bizarre. All these weird tuning things with distortion and effects and everything with a drum machine. And this idea for this band that I had that I wanted to be in. So I had that, and I started meeting musicians around here and doing this cover stuff. And I was like, well, this cover stuff isn't going to work. But on the second day here, I met this friend of mine named T. Scott. And he said, well, he was the road manager for a guy named James Hall, who I'd known, who was a really, really cool singer that was signed to Geffen Records. And T. Scott knew everybody that lived in Atlanta, all these people. And one of my roommates, Michael, at the time at Francisco's place, said, I know this band where one of the guys from Jellyfish lived in town. I said, oh man, Jellyfish, they're a great band. And he said, oh, the bass player has a band called Thing 1 Thing 2. You should go meet him. Here's the other singer, Rob's phone number. He lives right near us. You should call him up. So I call him up. The second day I'm here, I go see them play. I meet them. They talk to me. They realize that I'm a cool guy, and they invite me to come to a recording session the third day I'm there. So I go over and I start recording on this record that they're working on, playing guitar. And they asked me to join their band, so I became the third person in that band. And here I am, 22 years later. I never left. I ended up starting a band from scratch at the end of 1996, got signed to a record deal, which ended up going nowhere, which was a complete disaster, which is a whole nother story. But that led to my producing, which started really in 1995, helping a friend's band out called the Tender Idols, and realizing I had a talent for producing, which really wasn't that different from being a teacher. So that one decision to play in the demo with Alan in '89, which led me to 1994, that started out as the worst, most depressing year of my life. 32, broke, and had my car repossessed, to by November, the end of November, I had already lived in multiple places, even over in Europe, checked out all these music scenes that I had heard about, and ended up here in Atlanta with a whole new group of friends who I'm still friends with. And within a year and a half or so, had started a new band and got signed to a record deal, which ended up going nowhere but led me to producing, which eventually led me to making this video right now. So the irony of the whole story is that in 2007, I wrote a song with a band from North Carolina, an obscure band that had nothing going on, that in 2013 ended up being a #1 platinum selling country song called Carolina. That was 24 years after that summer day that Alan said, "Hey, come over to my place, let me play you some songs." Anything is possible. That's all for now. Please subscribe here to my Everything Music YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. I'm Rick Beato.